Good afternoon and welcome to the ISM Western New York Chapter Lunch and Learn webinar series. Our topic for today's discussion is going to be Rethinking What Matters, a dialogue on the future of supply chain management. It's going to be a very interesting discussion. We do encourage you to ask any questions, put any comments in the chat, and our speakers will then answer those questions as soon as they come in. So let's get started. And at this point, I'm going to turn the program over to Andrea and Domenico, and I'll have them do a little short intro of their bios.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for your time today. So my name is Andrea Patrucco, and I'm a professor here at Florida International University. My expertise in procurement and supplier relationship management. I'm going to lead this webinar with my colleague Domenico, and we're just going to present some of the results of our recent study regarding how the supply chain management field is going from now on, given all the recent news and changes that companies and supply chain have been experiencing. So we've designed this as an interactive session, and we hope that we'll be able to present also the results from the participant at the end. While I'm sharing the presentation, I'll start sharing. I'll let Domenico also introduce himself, and then we will get this started.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I am Domenico Mecca, postdoctoral researcher at Sant'Anna School of Advanced Studies in Pisa, Italy. My research focuses on circular economy, sustainability in business and supply chain. And it was a pleasure to work with Andrea and an amazing team of authors to this study that we are going to present. Andrea, I leave the floor.
Thank you. Just wanted to confirm that you see the correct screen.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so the objective of this webinar is to, again, present you the results of a study that we recently conducted regarding what are the main priorities that supply chain management research and practice should address in the near future. A little bit of background of where this study was shaped and kind of the idea of what we did. So in 2016, three colleagues that are also part of this study, they are not here today, but they're also part of this study. So Andreas Wieland, Rob Hanfield, and Christian Durak. I'm sure you might have seen Rob in other webinars organized by ISM. So they ran a study to see where supply chain management research was heading and where it should be heading in 2016. So basically, they started from the idea that the supply chain management discipline at that time was facing a series of changes. And then there were some challenging that were coming for companies. And so they wanted to understand how supply chain management research should have supported this evolution. So they ran this study. It was a three-stage design study. So they first did an open survey asking supply chain management people to name up to 3 hot teams for the next 5 years in 2016. Then they did a second survey where they presented the result and they asked these academics to rate each team in terms of, okay, do you think that this team will become important in supply chain management research? And do you think that this team should become important in supply chain management research? And then they compare the difference between the will perception with the should perception. And then they do a follow-up exercise with a panel of experts to try to connect these teams and try to understand the intersection between them. What did they find at that time? So as you can see here, the most dominant team, so the team that were perceived as most underappreciated, so different between they will become important and should become important, were not technologies or our stuff. They were mostly people or organizational issues. So the people dimension of supply chain management, so everything that relates to the human choices behind supply chain management decision, ethical issue, labor practices, sourcing and supplier conduct, social responsibilities, internal integration between department so that the company and the supply chain can work as a whole. Transparency and visibility issue with the supply chain partner, and for example, beyond tier first supplier and tier first customer. And human capital and talent management. So like how companies should build and keep their talent and their human skills to improve the supply chain. So basically, this was what they were foreseeing being the theme that should have dominated the supply chain management research, but they were not perceived as they will actually would have dominated. So keep this in mind because these are our baseline. This study is our baseline to better understand what have changed then in the last decade. Because that was back in 2016, but then what happened in the last 8 years? So here we're just like highlighted some of the main shocks that have affected supply chain and organization in the last 8 to 10 years. So think about Brexit that have realigned the trade rules in the European Union, COVID-19 that have caused disruption in supply chain at different level, both from a human resource management perspective, also from like components and materials and type of goods that were not available for a long time. Then think about all the issue with transportation, like the Suez blockage, the Suez Canal blockage, for example, that have caused interruption in delivery and logistics for quite a long time. Ukraine-Russian war that have reshaped, for example, the energy and the agri-food market and commodities, the semiconductor crisis and shortage that have constrained several industries from automotive to appliance, white goods, and so on. And more recently, like especially if you are a practitioner from the United States, which most of you are, the shock in economic policy, like all the discussion about tariff cycles and policy uncertainty that clearly changed the price of goods and kind of like the trade strategy with several countries. So with this idea in mind, we realized that, okay, that study was conducted in 2016. Probably it's now time to rethink where the supply chain management research should go from now on to better support these new realities and the needs from practitioners. So we start with this background and we say, okay, it's time for us to answer again this question. So first of all, try to understand, okay, in 2016, we had this study, but like how has supply chain management research evolved in the last decade? But then which are the teams that should dominate the next 5 years and how these teams can combine and correlate themselves to shape supply chain practices in light of these events and changes. So that's kind of like the context, and that's what we're gonna do today. So that's what we're kind of like planned the session. So we'll first want to give you an overview of what changed in supply chain management research in the last 8 years. And again, to get your sense of, okay, like this is what I've done in the last 8 years, like have these people actually researched the things that matter? Are the topics aligned with the pressure that I've experienced in the last 8 years? And then, okay, so from here, where are we going? So what are the high potential teams and crosscuts that academics perceived as being the most prominent moving forward? And this is where we also want to get your feelings that, okay, this is where we think supply chain management research is going. Do you think it makes sense? Do you think we're missing something? Do you have anything else that should be highlighted that instead is not present in the results? And then we close this with this discussion. So we want to understand what this means for you. So we'll try to translate those themes into like your day-to-day moves and reality. And we'll want to hear from you in terms of if you think that there's something missing. Before moving to part one, though, again, we want to make this session a little bit interactive. So we will have a couple of surveys through the presentation, and in discussion, we hopefully will present the results. The first the first activity that we want you to do is that before presenting you anything, so that you are not biased from our results, we want to get a quick pulse from you. So exactly as we did with our colleagues in academia. We want to understand from you what you think are going to be the most important themes for supply chain practice over the next 5 years. So don't care about research. So from your job perspective, procurement, logistics, inventory management, what do you think are the most important themes that your company, your organization, or just in your experience are going to be most important for supply chain management? So you can either scan the survey there, or Domenico, can you pass the link in the chat? Yeah. It should be pretty easy. So if we can, I will give you like 3-4 minutes to fill it out, and then we'll get it started. And then at the end, we will present like the main evidence. So we'll give you again 3-4 minutes to fill it out. It should give you the instruction, but like when we with team is like a short phrase, not like a specific project title. So public policy impact on supplier location, that's an example of a theme. Worker rights and remediation with supplier, that's an example of a theme. Initiating a project in South America for the construction of steel pipe, like that's not a theme. So just to give you an idea of the level of details that we're looking for. So if you can fill it out, then at the end, we'll show you the result that we can also compare with what we're going to present in the webinar. Yeah, for example, again, I don't want to bias the answer, but Alf said, better understand and find solution to counter the bullwhip effect. Solution and practices to counter the bullwhip effect is an example of a theme, like type of unit of analysis that we're looking for, level of detail that we're looking for.
Okay, I think we are on track to switch to part one. Of course, if you have not finished, the survey is still open. You can fill in whenever you like to. About the first part, we will explore how as the supply chain research evolved in the past 10 years. And what we have actually done is a literature review. So we looked at more than 2,300 papers that were published between 2016 and 2023 in 4 leading supply chain management journals, like Journal of Business Logistics, Journal of Operational Management, Journal of Supply Chain Management, and Production and Operational Journal. We coded the paper against the 35 research team from the study of 2016. and we were able to to assign a primary topic to more than 2,000 papers. So for 2,050 papers, we identified a primary topic within the list of the 35 research teams. For more than 1,000 papers, we were also able to identify a second teams. And this thing tell us that authors, researchers are increasingly working at the intersection between research teams rather than focusing on a single silo. There were also almost 300 papers. We were not able to assign a specific topic, and these papers were counted as additional topics. This is the table of the results about the recurrency of each theme in the literature between 2016 and 2023. You can see here marked on green the topics that, according to the 2016 rank, were expected to receive more attention, and they actually received a lot of attention from the research. Those topics are related to the digitalization and information technology, risk management, analytics, for example, forecasting, networks, dynamics, and supply chain finance. On the other hand, marked in red, we have the top 10 teams that the 2016 study identified as deserving more research attention. And here we can still see that those teams are at the bottom of the rank. So most of these topics are in the second part of the rank. And this, for example, ethical issues, role of human capital and talent management, the people dimension of supply chain management, the integration, the internal integration, that all of these were topic at the top of the ranking 2016. Those topics were topics with the highest research gap, and they are still topics that have received not much attention. In next slides, we will deep a bit in the most important clusters of topics that we identified. Andrea, if you could go. Yeah, okay, thank you. Okay, healthcare is the first cluster. It covers the 10% of the paper published in our sample, and here we can identify three different clusters. So the studies related to efficiency work, for example, on scheduling, on capacity, on patients flow, and inventory management for drugs, service, equipment. Here, the practical link is related to linking the schedule signals to the stock decision and let them drive the stock decision. About the second cluster related to the service integration, studies focused on the coordination across providers and transfers and on data-driven decision-making in healthcare operation and logistics. This cluster is about using interoperable data that can smooth the healthcare operation and coordination among different partners. About the third clusters, disruption and resilience, literature is focused on the real-time data and predictive analysis for the disruption mitigation. And as another research line is about on the disruption preparedness and resilience of the healthcare system. There is also a research stream on the comparison between public and private access and outcomes of these two different kinds of systems, and on the patient behaviors and experience and how can they drive the choices that then affect quality. And literature on healthcare had an important part related to the COVID experience and lesson learned from the global COVID pandemic. For example, here we have papers on management vaccine distribution, on the medical equipment, for example, ventilators, machines, and so on the predictive modeling for disease waves, and on the effectiveness of the stay-at-home policies. The next topic is the next research area is the behavioral issues. The behavioral issues covers almost the 8% of the papers, and it relates to the interplay between individual behavior, companies, and organizational behavior and practices, and supply chain performance. Here we have three clusters. The first is consumer behavior. Here the works are on delivery preferences, impulse buying, fairness of perception, and willingness to pay. Here, the takeaway message is that small changes in the delivery options, in fees, in return policies can shift the demand and the reverse flows. On the second cluster, that is related to behavioral biases, the studies focused on the how managers and consumers depart from the rational models, for example, optimism, confirmation, and the several kinds of bias related to the overconfidence and news vendors pull to center. In this case, we can say that we should debiasing the core processes. So we should rely on forecast, we should reference the class range on bias and to slow down the possible negative effect that bias could lead. Then the third cluster is related to the relational dynamics, and the research here examined the interpersonal behaviors, the information sharing, the psychological safety and managerial commitment, as well as the cultural heterogeneity in supply chain relationship. Here we can say as a global finding that performance improves when team can flag bad news as early, and teams can share data without any kind of penalty, and to foster this kind of environment and organizational and personal behavior, practitioner and managers should build that practices into governance. So, for example, define joint KPIs, so define cross-cultural norms, and set common strategies with their suppliers. About the third research area is related to innovation. Innovation covers the 6% of publications. We have four main clusters. The first is digital innovation, so studies that focus to the integration of advanced technologies, digital tools, platforms to enhance supply chain practices and enhance resilience. Then here we have also technological distance in supply chain network. Here the main takeaway is that we need to treat interoperability as a supply risk. We should start look where the variance is high. So, for example, in planning, transport activities, quality, and fit within existing system as a gating criterion. The second cluster is related to organizational learning. Here we have mechanism for knowledge sharing, knowledge co-creation, the mechanism of collaboration and co-creation between buyers and suppliers as drivers of innovation, and strategic partnership with startup and innovative companies. In this case, as main takeaway, we should be aware to formalize learning routines with suppliers and with other companies. For example, to set short pilots, to joint retrospectives, and to define clear rules for privacy and visible owner for the scale-up decision. In the third cluster, that is related to product and service innovation, we have the role of creativity, manufacturing, co-products, and related to the product innovation and other studies that focus on logistics and service innovation. Here, it is very important to highlight the role of companies in engaging with regulators during the pilots to avoid then late compliance surprises after implementing the project and the innovative solution. And as the last cluster, we have the innovation drivers here research focused on the feedback quality, incentives, awards, and drives from the heterogeneity and the geographic and cultural distance. The next research area is digitalization in supply chain. Here we have the 6% of papers related to this topic, but it is very important to highlight that this is a very growing topic with 72% of papers published after 2020. Here we have 5 clusters. The first is related to the AI and machine learning, so their application in demand, forecasting, predictive analysis, and the optimization that lead to enhancing of the decision-making capabilities and choices in supply chain. Here, there is a kind of recurring finding that the results depend on the data quality and the human supervision. So this kind of black box tools often underperform without a kind of governance that is able to manage the quality and supervision. Then we have the blockchain. Here, the research points to the better traceability in multi-tier settings. Here, of course, the benefits go also beyond the technology aspects and hinge on common data standards and supplier participation. The cybersecurity cluster, here the research connect supply chain with other system and other partners. For example, several papers highlight the third-party risk. Here also, the theme is the governance across firm boundaries, not just about the information technology, but also related to the privacy and security aspects inside and within and beyond the company. And then we have 2 clusters. The first on social media. Prior work treats social signals as a leading indicator of the demand, of the shifting demand, and as a real-time communication channel for understanding the dynamic of the disruption. And about e-commerce and omnichannel, here research centered the last mile delivery, inventory, visibility across channels, and return. Here it is very important to align that results define that trade-off, that there are kind of trade-off between speed, cost, and sustainability with several constraints emerging, such as reverse logistics. Then we have the research area of sustainability that cover almost the 6% of publication, but here we have that the dominant part of sustainability is related to the environmental issues rather than the ethical and social implication of sustainability. The cluster of environmental sustainability has explored different aspects such as corporate social responsibility, decarbonization, circular economy, and the operationalization of sustainable practice, following the logic and answer the question if does it pay to be green. About the people dimension, instead, the research looked to the interpersonal dynamic in collaboration, to the skill and competencies of supply chain management professionals, and the employee role in adopting new technologies for sustainability and new technologies for innovation. Here emerged a trend that adoption outcomes depends as much on team behavior and capability building as they depend on the tool itself. The third part the third cluster is related to ethical issues. Research is starting exploring the gender wage gap, the modern slavery on a global supply chain, and consumer influence on ethical sourcing decisions. It is very important to mention here that the 74% of paper on ethical issues were published after 2020. So this is a very growing area, not just for the attention of researchers, but also for the raise of several kinds of regulation. And the last research area is related to risk management, resilience, and disruption. Here, studies covered the risk identification and mitigation, the risk of contract and sourcing, as well as the behavioral drivers of risk management and the impact of external pressure of external actors and regulation. Here, from a practice lens, it is very important to map the risk that are both related to sourcing choices and to behavioral choices that can influence the risk and the performance of the company. Then we have three clusters related on resilience, disruption, and add-on of COVID-19. On resilience, research points to agility, flexibility, and adaptability, as well as collaboration, coordination, and mechanism to sharing the risk and practices. The disruption cluster highlights the proactive manager behavior, the supply chain plasticity and network design, and the lesson learned from the humanitarian logistics. Here it is very important to define when to switch modes while doing your activities and operation, and who is to lead the decision within the supply chain. And last, about COVID-19, there are almost three topics related to the diversification, to the importance of capability building, and to the resilience of firm in new way of working, for example, the work from home policy. So this is a very short recap about the most important topics that we identified. Andrea, I leave the floor to you. If you don't have a question right now, or maybe you can do question also later, as you prefer. Otherwise, Andrea, the floor is yours for the second part.
Yeah, so the idea of this part was that basically it was a very short recap of where our research in the field has been going in the last 8 years. So we see a bunch of stuff on healthcare, clearly very biased by the COVID pandemic. But then personally, which as I'm not in the field, there was a lot of research about behavioral issue and how they impact the supply chain choices, both on the customer side and both on an internal perspective. And then innovation, digitalization, sustainability, and risk management. So basically, one input we want to hear from you first is if you think about your work activities and your priorities in the last year, if you think that these priorities map well with what the research are doing, because again, that also gives us a feedback if we have done work that actually goes in a direction it was practice scope. But the bottom line is that's what happened in the past. So we said, okay, what should happen in the future from a research perspective, given the new supply chain challenges that are present today? So what we did was exactly to replicate the same approach that the 2016 studies put in place. So last year, so June 2024, we reached out to several of our colleagues in the field who published in the topic and in the journal that were included in the theme that we just showed. So we pick authors from the Journal of Business and Logistics, Journal of Supply Chain Management, Operational Management, Production Operational Management, who publish in this journal, and we ask them, okay, what do you think are going to be the most important themes for supply chain management research and practice in the next 5 years? We receive 185 responses, which give us almost 800 themes in total. We consolidate them in 48. And this is exactly the same question that you answered at the start of this webinar. So in this case, you are answering, in that case, where our academic colleagues are answering that question. Then in phase 2, we consolidate these 48 teams and we ask the same colleagues, okay, rate each team on 2 scales. How much do you think this team will actually become important in supply chain? So how much you think research will focus on this versus how much you think it should become important for supply chain management research. And then for each team, we did the difference similarly between should be important and will be important. So clearly, when we have the positive difference, it means that the team will be it's underestimated. It's overestimated. Instead, the negative difference is that there is likely be overemphasized. And then, as we did before, we try to map interaction between the topics. So try to understand, okay, these topics are sometimes not standalone. So if you combine, for example, you'll see the human resource management in supply chain versus AI. What are the main topic, the main issue, the main practice that goes at the intersection of these themes? So these are the results that we obtain. So on this part, you see highlighted in green are the one that has the largest positive gaps. So are the one that are at risk of being under-examined. Again, the last column showed the should minus will for each team, which means that if there is a positive difference, the community thinks that the team should get more attention than it will. So it is under-examined. Well, instead, if it is negative, we'll show another chart. It means that research will likely overemphasize a theme that is not perceived as important. So here we have 5 themes that I'm going to then talk about it very quickly. In green, the impact of public policy on supply chain management, the role of worker rights, the role of people and the human factors in supply chain, the impact of geopolitical risk and uncertainty, and the topic of decarbonization of the supply chain and Scope 3 emission and all the environmental issues. In red, instead, here you see the one with the largest negative gaps, so the one that are highly overemphasized. As you can see, there are a lot of technology themes, blockchain application, impact of AI in supply chain management, AI and machine learning integration, AI for optimization, and then something that typically our field tend to over-research, like finance and supply chain finance model and new inventory model, which instead should not really relevant from a research perspective, according to our colleagues. Now, what are the main feedbacks that we have received on each theme and what we think are the most important area that should be explored? So when we talk about public policy, basically we mean all the research that examine how policy impact the supply chain decision, data flows, supplier requirement, decision points, hiring decision, or location of manufacturing plant. We're not just talking about pure like compliance with regulation. Now, there are some things that supply chain research should investigate. For example, the mechanism. So what actually is going to change at the supply chain level when new policy are going to be implemented. For example, supplier might be required new data format or new disclosure, new certificate. The process might require extra checks, audit, new approval. There might be a change in the incentive and constraint structure. So, for example, think about when you open a new plant or the investment, how you make investment, the incentive you receive from the government to open in a location versus opening in another, or ban to open certain type of location in some areas or using some type of supplier and so on. Then impact on the performance. So does actually policy impact the effectiveness of supply chain functioning? So when there is an imposition in CO2 emission or transparency in terms of tier 2 supplier visibility and requirements in reporting this supplier, this transparency, are these policies actually helping supply chain in being more effective, in implementing more corrective action? Is your outcome actually changing after this new policy innovation? And then uncertainty. So how do supply chain cope with policy uncertainty? What are you doing in terms of, think about the tariff evolution. How are you preparing yourself to a possible change in economic and geopolitical decision that can impact your supply chain, location, manufacturing, production, inventory decision? If we move to the second theme, one theme that it's perceived as very important is worker rights in supply chain. Again, this is from a research perspective, but clearly it's also deserve attention in practice. So, for example, one thing that research should look at is how price pressure, lead times, change order, volume volatility. So all the market pressure determine change in the characteristic of the workforce or type of accident in the workforce, labor accident across tiers, and how companies are managing this type of potential source of risks. So from a practical perspective, research will actually go talk to companies, try to understand what are the new practices that have been implemented to cope with potentially this impact in workforce management. Then a second aspect could be the issue of spatial distancing and psychological distancing. So how geographic and organizational distance affects the speed and success of supply chain, and when it's appropriate to use or not local intermediary, NGOs, union, auditors, to smooth the effect of this distance on the workforce. So from a practical perspective, what is your company doing? What is the cultural and the direction your ownership is giving to your company in order to cope with this type of issue? Finally, we need to consider also the law and regulation perspective. So for example, here we mentioned the UK Modern Slavery Act, the EU due diligence rules, what they actually improve in practice. So go talk to companies that are absorbed this regulation and implemented in their supply chain. How are they tracking their effect and how they are considering this change in law and regulation affected positively or negatively their supply chain? Now, more in general, the role of people and human factors is still one of the most important things that our colleagues perceive as affecting supply chain research in the future. What does it mean? It means, for example, studying interpersonal and team dynamics. I know there's been a lot of research in that, but social interaction, coordination routine, team norms change day by day, especially with new technologies. So how teams behave, share news, how they interact and create tacit knowledge, how meetings and knowledge exchange are managed today is an important piece of supply chain behavioral research, and especially like when we're talking about cross-functional team and inter-company team, so like interaction between buyer and supplier from a point-to-point and personal perspective. Then the role of emotion and individual decision drivers, so try to understand how emotion affect supply chain management decision. Again, think about buyer-supplier negotiation, think about when and how to escalate a potential issue with supplier or customer. So everything that is like more intangible to be modeled and how they actually can impact supply chain outcome. And finally, last but not least, there is a lot of discussion about the interaction between human and technology. So think about AI and machine learning and big data, how these technology are reshaping roles, competence, perceived job security, and the skill to actually use them effectively. Geopolitics, we already touched on this a little bit through the webinar, but clearly there is a lot of fear or worries about how geopolitical risk and uncertainty related to how geopolitical dynamics can evolve can impact supply chain. One theme is, for example, how these aspects impact the characteristic of the networks and its resilience. Again, think about policy shock, tariff, sanction, export control, how they translate into different decisions in sourcing, inventorying, routing choices, and how different time change can affect the capability of the supply chain to deliver products and services on time. What companies are doing? How are they mapping this risk? How are they managing? What type of strategy are they implementing to reduce the exposure to these risks? Then we have what are the individual actions the supply chain actors are implementing to anticipate or influence these rules? Think about, for example, industry coalition or compliance by design, by designing products that are kind of like resilient to this type of evolution. So what type of action and information are supply chain management putting in place in order to respond to this type of uncertainty? And then how does it differ? Because we're talking in general, but like an SMEs is different than a multinational company. And a company based in South America is different from a company based in North America. A company based in China is different from a company based in Germany. So are there differences in terms of cultural and how culture absorb these shocks and implemented in organization and supply chain? And how are these different heterogeneous firms absorbing and implementing different capabilities to respond to this uncertainty? Finally, one important theme is the kind of like location of manufacturing. So offshoring, nearshoring, how are these evolving? How are these decisions affecting how, what is the global footprint of supply chain? Companies in different industries are reacting differently. So what are they doing in order to keep their globalization strategy, but at the same time, be sure that this is not negatively affected by possible changing in the geopolitical scenario? Last but not least, we have the theme about environmental management and compliance. Here, again, these are just some of the issues that we see more prominent. Supplier engagement. So how procurement is stimulating strategic supplier to set and meet emission target. Scope 3 emission, how are they being monitored? How are they being incentivized to be met, especially outside the company? And how are companies collecting data? So how are they sure that this data is tracked and it's auditable and it's reliable so that companies can actually put in place corrective and correct action to actually ensure that their supply chain is complying with Scope 3 emission? And then we have this emerging theme, the so-called post-growth lenses, so how supply chain are implementing selective downscaling to be more sustainable. And here we have a theme of system thinking and all the socio-ecological metrics that firms are implementing to reduce emission without causing a service loss or a product downgrade just because they want to be sustainable. So this is kind of like what we are seeing as where the supply chain management field is evolving. We were a little bit longer than expected, but like in the last few minutes, we would like to hear from you in terms of, based on what we presented, do you think that the theme that we have introduced are in line with your day-to-day challenges? And do you see like this being the biggest gap? Like, where do you see the biggest gap between practice and research based on what we present? If you wish, we do have a second survey that Domenico maybe can put in the chat. Like, if you actually want to give us your opinion in terms of themes that should and will be important, please do so by filling the survey. And again, we'll be happy to share with you the results after the webinar. I know that Katie will circulate the presentation. So if you want to fill it, then we will send you the results, and we'll send you the comparison between what you have said versus like the empirical evidence that we just presented. But yeah, so I want to open the floor for question or discussion. And if Domenico wants maybe to present some results from the first survey that he has elaborated, just to see what are the themes that the audience has mentioned.
Yes, Andrea, for sure. I'm going to share my screen.
And again, in the meantime, if there is any question or comments, please feel free to jump in. Again, we're happy to hear from you.
Okay, are you able to? Okay. No. Andrea, can you see my screen?
No.
No.
Oh, wait, yeah. Now I can.
That's
yes,
great.
now I can.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, this is just a word cloud that I have elaborated from the results of the first survey. Actually, there are a lot of very, very interesting answers, but a lot of them focus on the tariffs. So the role of tariffs in the how the tariff will affect supply chain, and how tariffs will impact on the U.S. Economy and U.S. sources strategy. Then there are few comments on the sourcing strategy and new procurement strategies. There is a couple of answers related to the impact of new viruses and disruption and disease on agri-food supply chain and on supply chain in general, so several kinds of supply chain. Sustainability recurs also a few times, and resilience is another topic that came in our in the sample of the responses that we received. I don't know if you have any question or if you want to comment.
Yeah, I see. I mean, it seems, so if you say that the bigger words, it seems to be tariff and AI. I mean, tariff is like an instance of like geopolitical uncertainty or policy, depends on what lenses you are looking at. Policy impact on supply chain, and AI too. So it seems there's, again, particularly in our field, it seems there is an over research on AI, which, again, from our perspective, we are not sure if we need all this research on AI, but it seems that right now is a big topic for companies. But the issue is it going to be a big topic 3 years from now, or is a technology that is going to be already mature soon enough to be introduced very smoothly in supply chain and internal processes, and same with tariffs. So now tariffs are a big issue because, again, it's one of the main things that the current administration is implementing. Now, is it something that is going to be carry on over the years, independently of what the administration is? That we don't know, but it seems there's going to be a lot of focus of research in the short on this topic. So kind of like the feedback we want to hear is that, like, do we think that this is actually been helpful, or you think that like what's value, there's no value for supply chain research to be focused on that? So like, what do you think it's the emphasis in terms of like main priorities and how they're going to move forward. Or if you already want to see something that is not present right now, but is going to be present in the future. So this kind of like the feedback that we're looking for. So a comment. Yeah. So yeah, so I will pass this comment to Rob. Yeah, Rob is part of this study too. And again, he's a big public policy person. So again, the part that I presented regarding public policy impact and geopolitical uncertainty, he's the one that's throwing most of the ideas, as he has also made a lot of work in the last years with the United States government on these topics. I don't know if anyone has any question or feedback, but again, we will be happy to answer. And again, if you fill the survey, we will be happy to send you more structured result after the presentation. So we will send you this presentation, and at the end, we will put you the results of survey 1 and survey 2, so you can see the difference in your answer compared to our study answer. And again, if you have any comments, we'll be happy to answer after. I want to show you just one last thing that I kept hidden on purpose. While we were using, yeah, I'm gonna share. While we were doing this study, ASCM released their studies on what are the main competitive team and priorities for supply chain in the future, in the next couple of years. And we were, I mean, overall happy to see that like our findings in terms of what is going to be most important is not too far from what the ASCM 2025 ranking put out. So this is the teams that they had. You can see AI, global trade, geopolitical policies, big data and advanced analytics, cybersecurity. So there's a lot of technology, which is pretty mature from a supply chain management research perspective. So that's why you see, for example, big data is ranked low, but that's because we already have a lot of studies on that. So probably people don't want to like focus too much on it. But you see, like for the top team, they were all present. So artificial intelligence, global trade dynamics. So we didn't miss anything in terms of prioritization. We've seen a little bit of a misalignment. So that's something that we're also, a message that we're also vehicle in our study, that if we take the SCM 2025 ranking, in terms of team, we are aligned, but in terms of ranking, there's a little bit of misperception between the two fields. So that's something that probably academia should reflect on. That's my takeaway, personal. I don't want to generalize. In your results, did you find any interested to study the role of non-major actor in supply chain? Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That's actually a very underestimated area. This is mentioned particularly when we talk about geographical and psychological distance aspect and the effect on the workforce. We find that there are very few studies that focus on how intermediaries, for example, you mentioned Union, can mitigate the effect of geographical distant companies. Like think about a company that is a worker in New York, but most of their plant are like in Peru or in Australia. So very far different time zone. They're still governed centrally, but then, and we found that there are some studies that show that there is a negative impact of geographical, spatial, and then psychological distance from the headquarters, and understanding how companies can use intermediate to mitigate this distance is absolutely something that is missing in our field. So 100% that's a team that we support and being relevant. And when we talk also to companies, they don't really know how much this investment actually pay off. So they should rely on intermediaries because there's not much research on the field. Any other question? Well, if not, I'll turn to Kathy. And again, we will be happy to share the presentation. And you have our contact, please. We're really looking for, because there was an academic study. So if you have any input that you want to provide, that's what we are looking for. We don't want to just talk to academic. We want to be sure that our messages resonate with practice. So if you have any comments or question, please feel free to share with even negative one, actually, especially negative one. Please feel free to share them with us, and we'll embed them in our discussions.
Well, thank you both. That was quite a presentation and very thorough. Thank you so much. A lot of interesting insights definitely have come out on this, and I'm so glad you were able to share it with our ISM community today. Thank you so much. At this point, I'm going to say thank you, Andrea and Domenico, and all of our ISM members and guests that are joined us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.